The blood on Willow Winchester's hands wouldn't wash away, no matter how hard she scrubbed them raw in the basin of cold water behind the saloon where she'd worked for the past 3 months in Muskogee, Oklahoma Territory, in the spring of 1887. She wasn't a murderer, but the town didn't see it that way. They saw a woman who'd been present when a man died, a woman who'd made choices that respectable folks whispered about behind lace curtains and over Sunday dinners. The fact that she defended herself against a drunk who tried to force himself on her didn't matter to most of them. Women like her, women who worked in saloons and wore rouge on their cheeks, didn't deserve the benefit of doubt. The marshal had cleared her of wrongdoing after 2 agonizing days in a cell that smelled of urine and desperation. The drunk had pulled a knife first, witnesses confirmed. She'd grabbed the poker from the stove in the back room where he'd cornered her, and when he'd lunged, she'd swung it with all the strength terror could provide. He'd hit his head on the corner of a table going down. The knife wound in her side had been enough evidence of his intentions, but it didn't matter. 3 days after her release, Willow found herself standing in the dusty street with everything she owned packed into a worn carpetbag. The saloon owner, a sharp-faced woman named Mrs. Carmichael, had pressed $2 into her palm and told her not to come back. The other establishments wouldn't hire her. The boarding house where she'd rented a room had evicted her. Even the church, where she'd sometimes slipped in to sit in the back pew and remember what it felt like to be a child who believed in goodness, had made it clear she wasn't welcome. "You bring shame on decent people," Reverend Patterson had said, his jowls quivering with righteous indignation. "Perhaps this is God's way of telling you to change your path." She'd wanted to scream at him that she'd been trying to survive, that working in a saloon serving drinks was better than starving, that she hadn't asked for any of this. But screaming wouldn't fill her belly or put a roof over her head, so she'd simply walked away. Now, as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her uncovered head, Willow walked along the rutted road leading out of Muskogee. She had no destination in mind, just the bone-deep knowledge that staying meant slow starvation or worse. Her side still ached where the knife had caught her, and each step sent a sharp reminder through her ribs. She'd walked perhaps 3 miles when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching from behind. Willow moved to the side of the road, keeping her eyes down. Most folks wouldn't stop for a woman alone, especially not if they recognized her. The wagon slowed, then stopped beside her. Against her better judgment, Willow looked up. The man driving was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 25 or 26 to her own 22 years. He had sun-browned skin and light brown hair that curled slightly beneath a battered hat. His eyes were a startling green, the color of new grass after spring rain, and they studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You look like you're heading somewhere in particular," he said. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with a slight drawl that suggested he'd spent time further south. "Just away," Willow said honestly. There seemed no point in lying. "A way's a long walk in this heat." He gestured to the wagon bed behind him. "I'm heading to my ranch about 10 miles north. There's a creek runs through the property. You could at least fill your canteen, rest a bit in the shade." Willow's first instinct was to refuse. She'd learned the hard way that kindness from strangers often came with expectations attached. But her feet hurt, her side ached, and the $2 in her pocket wouldn't last long. She needed water, and she needed to think about what came next. "I don't have anything to pay you with," she said carefully. Something shifted in his expression. "Didn't ask you to pay. Asked if you wanted a ride to some water and shade." He paused. "Name's Henry Norris. I run cattle about 10 miles up this road. Willow Winchester." She watched for recognition, for the change that would come over his face when he placed her name. But Henry just nodded and offered his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. His grip was calloused and strong, the hand of a man who worked with them every day. Willow settled herself carefully, mindful of her injury, and set her carpetbag at her feet. They rode in silence for a while. The wagon creaked and swayed over the uneven road, and Willow found herself stealing glances at the man beside her. He had a strong profile, with a straight nose and a jaw that looked like it could take a punch. There was something solid about him, something that suggested reliability. "You from Moscow, G?" Henry asked eventually. "For the past few months. Before that, I was in Kansas." "What brings you to Oklahoma territory?" Willow considered her answer carefully. She could lie, make up some story about family or opportunity. But lies had a way of catching up to you, and she was tired of pretending. "I was looking for work. Found it in a saloon." She waited for him to stiffen, to turn cold the way most respectable men did when they learned what she was. Henry was quiet for a moment. "Serving drinks?" "Yes." "Hard work, I'd imagine, dealing with drunks all night." There was no judgment in his voice, just statement of fact. Willow felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "It paid enough to keep a roof over my head and food in my belly. That's more than I had before." "Where's your family?" "Dead. Cholera took my parents and my little brother when I was 17. I've been on my own since." Henry's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "I'm sorry. That's a hard thing." They fell into silence again, but it felt different now, less awkward. The landscape around them was beautiful in a harsh way, all rolling grassland dotted with scrub oak and the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking a creek bed. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermals. "Why'd you leave?" Henry asked. "The saloon, I mean, if it was paying." This was the moment of truth. Willow took a breath and felt the pull in her injured side. "A drunk tried to force himself on me. I fought back. He died when he fell and hit his head. The marshal cleared me, but the town decided I wasn't fit company for decent folk anymore." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. She'd cried all her tears already. Henry was quiet for so long that Willow thought she'd made a mistake being honest. Then he said, "A man forces himself on a woman, he deserves what he gets. Sounds to me like you did what you had to do." The simple acceptance in his words made Willow's throat tight. Most people don't see it that way. Most people are fools. Henry guided the wagon around a particularly deep rut. "Easier to blame a woman than admit that men they drink with and do business with might be capable of that kind of violence." Willow stared at him. "You talk like you've thought about this before." "Had a sister," Henry said quietly. "She died 5 years ago. A man she trusted, a man our whole community respected, hurt her. When she tried to tell people, they called her a liar, said she was trying to ruin his reputation. She couldn't live with the shame of being called a liar and having everyone turn their backs on her." He paused. "Found her in the barn one morning. She'd hanged herself. I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate, but Willow didn't know what else to say. Her name was Hannah. She was 20 years old, had her whole life ahead of her. Henry's voice was rough with old grief. "So no, Miss Winchester, I don't think you're to blame for defending yourself. I think the people who cast you out are cowards who'd rather protect their comfortable illusions than face ugly truths." They rode on, and Willow felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in days, she didn't feel completely alone. The Norris ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun began its slow descent toward evening. It wasn't grand, just a small house built of logs with a stone chimney, a barn that had seen better days, and a series of corrals and outbuildings. But it was neat, well-maintained, and when they got closer, Willow could hear the sound of running water. "Creek's just beyond those trees," Henry said, pointing to a line of cottonwoods. "Good cold water runs year-round even in drought." He helped her down from the wagon with the same courteous touch he'd used to help her up. Willow found herself noticing the way his hands spanned her waist, strong but careful, as if he was aware of her injury. The creek was as beautiful as he'd promised, clear water running over smooth stones, with trees providing dappled shade. Willow knelt carefully and filled her canteen, then splashed water on her face and neck. It felt like heaven. When she turned back, Henry was unhitching his horses from the wagon. She watched him work, efficient and practiced, talking softly to the animals as he led them to water. "I have some stew left from yesterday," he called over. "You're welcome to share it, not fancy, but it's filling." Willow's stomach growled at the mention of food. She'd had nothing but a piece of bread that morning and her supplies were nearly gone. "I don't want to impose. Wouldn't have offered if it was an imposition." Henry finished with the horses and walked back toward her. "Come on. You can tell me where you're planning to go next." That was the problem. Willow had no idea where she was going or what she was going to do, but she followed Henry to the house, grateful for even this temporary reprieve from uncertainty. The inside of the house was spare but clean. There was a main room with a fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair near the hearth. A door led to what Willow assumed was a bedroom, and another to a small kitchen area. The walls were bare except for a single photograph in a frame on the mantel. Henry saw her looking at it. "My family. Before." He didn't elaborate, and Willow didn't ask. He heated the stew in a pot over the fire while Willow sat at the table, feeling awkward and out of place. But when he served her a generous portion with thick slices of bread, she forgot her discomfort in the simple pleasure of hot food. "This is good," she said between bites. "My mother's recipe. She made sure Hannah and I could both cook before she passed. Said a person who can't feed themselves is at the mercy of others." Henry sat down across from her with his own bowl. She was right about that. They ate in companionable silence. When Willow had finished, feeling more full than she had in days, Henry poured them both coffee from a pot that had been keeping warm by the fire. "So," he said, settling back in his chair. "What are your plans?" "I don't know," Willow admitted. "I thought maybe I'd head to one of the bigger towns, try to find work. But I don't have much money, and word travels fast about women like me." "Women like you," Henry repeated. "You mean women who have had to work hard to survive?" Willow felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Women who have worked in saloons, women with reputations. Seems to me a reputation is just what other people decide to think about you, doesn't make it true." Henry studied her over his coffee cup. "What kind of work would you want to do if you had a choice?" No one had ever asked her that before. Willow thought about it. "I like working with my hands, sewing, mending, that sort of thing. I'm good with animals too. My father had a small farm before he died. I helped with everything, milking cows, feeding chickens, tending the garden." She paused. "I'd like to have a garden again someday. Seems peaceful, growing things." Henry nodded slowly. "This ranch, it's more than I can handle alone. I've been managing because I don't have much choice, but I could use help. The garden's gone to weeds because I don't have time to tend it. I've got chickens, but no one to collect eggs regularly. The house could use a woman's touch, I suppose, though I keep it clean enough." Willow's heart began to beat faster. "Are you offering me work?" "I'm offering you a proposition." Henry leaned forward. "You help me run this place, I'll give you room, board, and a wage. Nothing inappropriate," he added quickly. "You'd have the bedroom. I can sleep in the barn, or I could build you a separate cabin given time and materials. But you'd have a roof over your head, food, and honest work. You could stay as long as you needed, or until you figured out where you wanted to go next." It sounded too good to be true. Willow's experience had taught her that when something sounded too good to be true, it usually was. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Henry was quiet for a moment. "Because someone should have done it for Hannah. Because I know what it's like to watch the whole world turn its back on someone who needed help. Because I've got more space than I need and work that needs doing." He met her eyes. "And because I think you deserve a chance to start over somewhere where people don't know your story." Willow felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back. "I'll work hard. I promise I will. I believe you." Henry stood and began clearing the dishes. "We can work out details in the morning. For now, you should rest. The bedroom's through that door. Sheets are clean. I'll bunk in the barn tonight." "I can't take your bed," Willow protested. "You can and you will. You're injured and you've had a hell of a few days." Henry's tone left no room for argument. "Get some rest, Miss Winchester. Tomorrow we'll figure out how this is going to work." Willow wanted to argue more, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a physical weight. She gathered her carpet bag and made her way to the bedroom, which was small but comfortable, with a real bed and a window that looked out toward the creek. She lay down fully clothed, intending to rest just for a moment, and fell into the deepest sleep she'd had in months. The next morning, Willow woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The wagon, Henry Norris, the offer of work and shelter. She sat up carefully, testing her injured side. It still hurt, but less than yesterday. She'd been changing the bandage regularly, and it seemed to be healing cleanly. After tidying herself as best she could, Willow emerged from the bedroom to find Henry at the stove cooking breakfast. He'd already been up for hours, she could tell. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd washed at the creek, and he moved with the energy of someone who'd accomplished tasks already. "Morning," he said. "Hope you like bacon and eggs. The chickens were productive this morning." "I like anything I don't have to cook myself," Willow said honestly. "But I should be doing the cooking, if I'm working for you. You'll earn your keep starting today, don't worry." Henry plated food for both of them. "But you needed rest more than I needed a cook last night." They sat down to eat, and Henry outlined his thoughts about how they'd divide the work. He'd handle the heavy labor with the cattle, repairs, and building projects. Willow would manage the house, the garden, the chickens, and help with lighter ranch work when needed. He'd pay her $10 a month in addition to room and board. "That's generous," Willow said. It was more than she'd made at the saloon. "It's fair." Henry finished his coffee. "I need the help, you need the work. We both benefit." As they cleaned up from breakfast, Willow asked, "What should I call you? Mr. Norris seems formal if we're living on the same property." "Henry's fine." "I'll call you Willow if that suits you." "It does." They settled into a routine with surprising ease. Henry showed Willow around the property that first day, pointing out where everything was and explaining what needed doing. The garden was indeed a mess of weeds, but Willow could see the bones of it, the neat rows that someone had once carefully planted. "My mother's garden," Henry said quietly. "She loved growing things. After she died, Hannah tried to keep it up, but after Hannah was gone, I couldn't seem to make myself care about it." "I'll bring it back," Willow promised, "if you don't mind me changing things around." "Do whatever you want with it. I'd like to see things growing there again." The chickens were friendly and well-fed, and Willow collected a basket of eggs while Henry went to check on his small herd of cattle. When he returned at midday, she had lunch ready, simple sandwiches and cold water from the creek. "You didn't have to do all this already," he said, looking at the swept floors and the dishes she'd washed and put away. "I told you I'd work hard." That afternoon, while Henry repaired a section of fence, Willow began the massive task of weeding the garden. It was hot, dirty work, and her side protested, but there was something deeply satisfying about it. Each weed she pulled was a small victory, a tiny piece of order restored to chaos. She worked until the sun began to set, then headed to the creek to wash. When she returned to the house, Henry had dinner cooking, simple beans and salt pork. "Tomorrow I'll cook," Willow said firmly. "You're already doing enough." They ate and talked about the day's work, making plans for the next day. It felt strangely domestic, strangely normal, as if Willow hadn't been cast out of town just 2 days ago. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her, Willow felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, she really could start over here. The days turned into weeks, and Willow fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose early and cooked breakfast for both of them. While Henry worked with the cattle or made repairs, she tended the garden, cared for the chickens, cleaned the house, and prepared meals. The garden began to transform under her care, the weeds giving way to neat rows ready for planting. Henry brought her seeds from town on his next trip, vegetable seeds and flower seeds both. "Thought you might like these," he said, handing her the packets. Mother always said a garden needed flowers as much as vegetables, something about feeding the soul as well as the body. Willow planted tomatoes and beans, carrots and squash. She planted sunflowers along the fence and morning glories near the porch. Each seed felt like a promise, like proof that she was putting down roots. Henry continued sleeping in the barn, despite Willow's repeated protests that she could manage with a bedroll in the main room. "You need proper rest to heal," he'd say, and that was the end of it. But as the weeks passed, Willow found herself looking forward to the evenings most of all. After dinner, they'd sit on the porch and watch the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. Henry told her about growing up in Texas, about moving to Oklahoma Territory with his family to start fresh. She told him about her childhood in Kansas, about her father's small farm and her mother's laugh. "What made you leave Kansas after your family died?" Henry asked one evening. "I tried to stay. There were people in town, neighbors who'd known my family. I thought they'd help me." Willow pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "But I was 17 and alone. The couple who took me in expected me to work without pay, said they were doing me a favor by keeping me from the streets. When the husband started coming to my room at night, I ran." Henry's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not the way he wanted to. I got out before that, but I've been running ever since, trying to stay ahead of starvation and worse." She looked out at the darkening sky. "This is the first place I've felt safe in 5 years." "You are safe here," Henry said quietly. "I give you my word on that." Willow believed him. More than that, she was starting to trust him, which was something she hadn't done with anyone in a very long time. As spring deepened into early summer, the garden burst into life. Tiny green shoots pushed up through the soil, and Willow tended them with careful devotion. The chickens thrived under her care, producing more eggs than 2 people could eat. Henry showed her how to preserve the extras in a crock with water-glass solution for the winter months ahead. They worked well together, Willow discovered. Henry was patient and willing to teach her things she didn't know about ranch work. She learned to milk the cow he kept for butter and cream, learned to mend harnesses and tack, learned 100 small skills that made ranch life easier. And slowly, carefully, something began to grow between them that had nothing to do with employer and employee. It started with small things. The way Henry's face lit up when he came in from a long day and found her in the kitchen, the house filled with the smell of baking bread. The way Willow's heart beat a little faster when she heard his footsteps on the porch. The accidental brush of hands when they both reached for the same dish. The touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. One evening in late June, Henry came back from checking the far pasture with wildflowers in his hand. "Saw these and thought of you," he said, offering them to Willow with an expression that was almost shy. They were simple prairie flowers, black-eyed Susans and wild indigo, but Willow took them like they were roses. "They're beautiful, thank you." She found a jar to put them in and set them on the table. That night, as they sat on the porch, the silence between them felt charged with something unspoken. "Willow," Henry said finally, "I need to be honest with you about something." Willow's stomach tightened. Here it comes, she thought. The catch, the expectation, the price for all this kindness. "When I offered you this job, I meant exactly what I said. Room, board, wages, nothing more. I want you to know that hasn't changed. You're safe here no matter what." Henry paused. "But I also need you to know that I've come to care for you, not as an employee. As a woman, I admire and respect and think about far more than I probably should." Willow's heart was pounding. "Henry, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know the truth." He looked out at the darkening prairie. "If it makes you uncomfortable, I'll keep my distance. The last thing I want is for you to feel trapped here." "I don't feel trapped," Willow said softly. "I feel like I've finally found a home, and Henry, I care for you too. I've been trying not to, because it seemed foolish to hope for more than what we already have, but I can't help it." Henry turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "You mean that?" "I do." Willow twisted her hands in her lap. "But I need you to understand something. The people in Muskogee, the way they treated me, that will follow me. If anyone finds out about my past, about what I did, it could reflect badly on you. People might stop doing business with you. The ranch could suffer. Let them talk." Henry reached over and took one of her hands in his. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. "I don't give a damn what people think. You defended yourself against a man who tried to hurt you. There's no shame in that. You say that now, but when it affects your livelihood, when people you've known for years turn their backs on you because of me, then they weren't worth knowing in the first place." Henry squeezed her hand gently. "Willow, I lost Hannah because she cared too much what people thought, because the weight of their judgment crushed her. I won't make that mistake again. I won't let the opinions of small-minded people dictate how I live my life or who I care about." Willow felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I don't deserve you. That's where you're wrong." Henry reached up and gently wiped her tears away with his thumb. "You deserve someone who sees you for who you really are, a strong, capable, kind woman who's survived things that would have broken most people. You deserve to be cherished, not cast out." "Henry." His name was barely a whisper. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I've wanted to for weeks, but I need you to know it's what you want too." In answer, Willow leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. Then Henry's hand came up to cup her face, and Willow's fingers tangled in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that made her feel like she was falling and being caught at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "I'm in love with you, Willow Winchester. I think I have been since the day I saw you walking down that dusty road, so determined and brave even though the whole world had just turned against you." "I love you too," Willow whispered. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this way about anyone, didn't think anyone could look past my mistakes and my history. They're not mistakes, they're just your life, and your history is what made you who you are." Henry kissed her forehead softly. "I don't want to rush you into anything. We can take this as slow as you need. I just needed you to know how I feel." That night, they sat on the porch until the stars came out, holding hands and talking about the future. For the first time in her life, Willow dared to imagine a future that included happiness, a future where she wasn't alone. As summer progressed, their relationship deepened. They were careful to maintain propriety, knowing that even out on the isolated ranch, rumors could spread. But stolen kisses in the garden and long evenings on the porch became the highlights of Willow's days. The garden flourished under her care, and soon they had more vegetables than they could eat. Henry suggested they take the excess to town to sell, but Willow balked at the idea. What if someone from Muskogee is there? What if they've spread stories about me? Then we'll deal with it together. Henry took her hand. But Willow, you can't hide forever, and you have nothing to be ashamed of. They went to the small town of Checotah, about 15 miles from the ranch, on a Saturday morning. Willow had dressed carefully in her best dress, her hair pinned up neatly. She looked respectable, she thought, looking at herself in the small mirror. She looked like a rancher's wife might look. The thought made her blush. Henry hadn't proposed, though the way he looked at her sometimes suggested it was only a matter of time. The town was busy with weekend shoppers. They set up at the edge of the market square with their vegetables, and to Willow's amazement, they sold out within 2 hours. People complimented the quality of the produce and asked if they'd be back next week. "See," Henry said as they drove home, the wagon lighter and Willow's pocket heavier with coins. Nothing to be afraid of. But the next week, when they returned to Checotah, a woman approached their wagon with a sharp look in her eyes. "You're the one from Muskogee," she said to Willow. "The one who killed that man." Willow felt the blood drain from her face. Henry stepped closer to her, a protective presence at her side. "She defended herself against a man who attacked her," Henry said firmly. "The marshal cleared her of any wrongdoing." "That's not what I heard." The woman sniffed. "I heard she was working in a saloon, living a sinful life, and when one of her customers wanted more than she was willing to give, she killed him in cold blood." "Then you heard wrong." Henry's voice was hard as iron. "And I'll thank you to keep your gossip to yourself and move along." The woman huffed indignantly and stalked off, but the damage was done. Other people were looking now, whispering. Willow felt her chest tighten with familiar panic. "We should go," she whispered to Henry. "We haven't sold all the vegetables yet." "Henry, please." He looked at her face and immediately began packing up. But before they could leave, a man stepped forward. He was older, maybe 50, with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Don't pay attention to Martha Hendricks," he said. "She's got more tongue than sense and nothing better to do than spread malicious talk." He tipped his hat to Willow. "Name's Samuel Foster. I run the general store here in town. Your vegetables are the best I've seen in years. I'd be interested in buying from you regularly if you're willing to sell to me wholesale." Willow stared at him, waiting for the catch. "I know your story," Samuel continued gently. "Or at least, I know the version that's been circulating. But I also know that stories get twisted in the telling, especially when they are about women who don't fit into neat little boxes of what's considered proper. My own daughter left home 5 years ago because this town couldn't accept that she wanted to be a school teacher instead of getting married and having babies. So I've learned not to put much stock in what folks say about women who dare to live their own lives." "Thank you," Willow managed. "We'd be happy to sell to you." They worked out an arrangement on the spot. Samuel would buy all the produce they could provide at fair prices, and they wouldn't have to deal with the market directly. It was better than Willow had hoped. On the drive home, Henry was quiet. Finally, he said, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." "That man, Samuel, he was kind, he was. But that woman upset you." "Of course she did." "But Henry, that's going to keep happening. People are going to judge me. They're going to make assumptions." Willow looked at him. "Are you sure you're ready to deal with that? Because it's not going to stop, I'm sure." Henry reached over and took her hand. "Willow, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no. There's no pressure, and it won't change how I feel about you or your place here on the ranch." Willow's heart began to race. "What is it? Marry me." Henry pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "I love you. I want to build a life with you, a real life. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to watch our garden grow and raise children with you and grow old together." He paused. "I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Willow felt tears streaming down her face. "Henry, if we get married, people will talk even more. They'll say terrible things about both of us. Let them talk. I don't care. Do you love me? You know I do. Then marry me. Let me give you my name and my protection and my heart. Let me stand beside you and face down every narrow-minded gossip from here to Texas and back again." Henry cupped her face in his hands. "You said this ranch feels like home. Let me make it your home, truly and legally. Say yes, Willow." "Yes." The word came out as a sob. "Yes, I'll marry you." Henry kissed her there in the wagon on the side of the road, with the Oklahoma sun beating down and grasshoppers singing in the tall grass. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Willow felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Samuel Foster and his wife stood as witnesses, along with a young couple from a neighboring ranch who'd become friendly with Henry over the years. The preacher was an old circuit rider who cared more about whether people loved each other than about their pasts. Willow wore a simple white dress that she'd sewn herself, with flowers from her garden in her hair. Henry wore his best suit, looking so handsome that Willow could barely catch her breath when she saw him. "Do you, Henry Norris, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher asked. "I do." Henry's voice was firm and clear. "And do you, Willow Winchester, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Willow's voice shook with emotion. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Henry gathered Willow into his arms and kissed her with such tenderness that she felt it all the way to her soul. When they pulled apart, their small group of witnesses applauded. They had a simple celebration afterward, with food that Willow and Henry had prepared together. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with genuine warmth and good wishes. Samuel's wife, Margaret, took Willow aside at one point. "You've made a good match," she said. "Henry Norris is one of the finest men I know. He'll treat you right. I know he will." Willow watched Henry across the yard, laughing at something Samuel had said. "I still can't believe this is real sometimes, that someone like him could love someone like me." Margaret patted her hand. "Love doesn't work that way, dear. It's not about deserving or being worthy. It's about two people finding each other and choosing to walk through life together. You both got lucky." That night, after their guests had left and the ranch was quiet again, Henry carried Willow over the threshold of the house they now officially shared. He'd spent the past week building a proper bedroom for them, adding it onto the house so they'd have more space. "Welcome home, Mrs. Norris," he said, setting her down gently. "Mrs. Norris." Willow tested the name. "I never thought I'd have a new name, a fresh start." "You can be whoever you want to be now." Henry pulled her close. "Our life together starts here, and the past is just the past." That night, they truly became husband and wife in every sense of the word. Henry was gentle and patient, and when Willow cried, he held her and whispered how much he loved her until the tears turned to joy. Afterward, lying in his arms with the moonlight streaming through the window, Willow felt at peace for the first time in her life. She was home. She was loved. She was safe. The years that followed were the happiest Willow had ever known. The ranch prospered under their joint care. The garden expanded, and they began supplying Samuel's store with a regular stream of produce. Henry's cattle herd grew, and he took on a hired hand to help with the heavier work. Willow threw herself into making the ranch a true home. She sewed curtains for the windows and braided rugs for the floors. She planted more flowers every spring, until the house was surrounded by blooms from early summer through late fall. She learned to preserve food for the winter, filling shelves with jars of vegetables and fruits. But the greatest joy came in the spring of 1889 when Willow discovered she was pregnant. "Are you sure?" Henry asked when she told him, his face a mixture of excitement and fear. "As sure as I can be. I've missed my courses for 2 months and I'm sick every morning." Willow took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Henry whooped with joy and spun her around, then immediately set her down, worried he'd hurt her. "Are you all right? Should you be doing all the work you've been doing? Maybe you should rest more." "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." Willow laughed at his concern. "Women have been having babies and doing ranch work for as long as there have been ranches. I'll be fine." But Henry insisted on hiring a woman from town to help with the heavy cleaning, and he took over more of the garden work as Willow's belly grew. He was protective, almost to the point of being ridiculous, but Willow found it endearing rather than annoying. The baby came in early November, a long and difficult labor that left Willow exhausted but triumphant. Henry, who'd insisted on staying by her side despite the midwife's protests that it wasn't proper, held her hand through every contraction and cried when he heard the baby's first wail. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Willow's chest. Willow looked down at her son, this tiny perfect human she and Henry had created, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "He's perfect," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. He touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers immediately wrapped around his father's finger. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him James after Henry's father. James Norris came into the world healthy and loud, with his father's green eyes and his mother's determination. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Willow learned to function on little sleep, to nurse a baby while simultaneously cooking dinner or mending clothes. Henry helped when he could, walking the floors with James in the middle of the night when the baby was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always put their son to sleep. When James was 6 months old, Henry came home from town one day with a thoughtful expression on his face. "What is it?" Willow asked, bouncing the baby on her hip. "I ran into Martha Hendricks in town today, the woman who gave you trouble that time at the market." Willow felt her stomach tighten. "What did she say?" "She congratulated me on the baby, said she'd heard we had a son." Henry paused. "Then she said something interesting. She said she'd been wrong about you, that she could see from how the ranch was thriving and how happy I looked that you were a good wife and mother. She said she was sorry for judging you." Willow stared at him. "She apologized, in her own way, yes. I think having some time to reflect, seeing that we built a good life together, it changed her perspective." Henry took James from her and tossed the baby gently in the air, making him giggle. "People can surprise you sometimes." Not everyone came around, of course. There were still those in the surrounding communities who whispered about Willow's past, who said Henry had made a mistake marrying a woman with a reputation. But increasingly, those voices were drowned out by the evidence of their happy marriage and successful ranch. Samuel Foster became a good friend to both of them. He and Margaret would come for dinner once a month, and they always made Willow feel welcomed and valued. Through them, Willow began to build other friendships, slowly and carefully. The woman Henry had hired to help with cleaning, a widow named Anne, became a close confidante. The young couple from the neighboring ranch, Peter and Susan Miller, often came by with their own children for the kids to play together. Willow was building a community, a network of people who knew her story but chose to see her as she was now rather than defining her by her past. It was more than she'd ever dared to hope for. James grew from a baby into a toddler, running around the ranch on sturdy legs, getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of young children. He loved the animals, especially the chickens, and would sit in the garden with Willow for hours, digging in the dirt and helping plant seeds. "He's going to be a rancher like his daddy," Henry said one evening, watching James toddle after the chickens. "Or a farmer like his mama," Willow countered. "Look how much he loves the garden. Maybe he'll be both." Henry pulled Willow close. "Can you believe it's been 3 years since that day I found you walking down the road? Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday." Willow leaned into his embrace. "I was so lost then. I didn't know how I was going to survive the next day, let alone build a life. And now look at you. A ranch, a husband, a son, a thriving garden." Henry kissed the top of her head. "You did that, Willow. You took the chance I offered and you built all of this with your own hard work and determination." "We built it together," Willow corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." In the fall of 1891, Willow discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She continued working in the garden and caring for James, though Henry and Anne insisted she rest more than she had with her first pregnancy. The baby, a girl they named Rose after the wild roses that grew along the creek, was born in the spring of 1892. She was smaller than James had been, with dark hair instead of light, but she had the same healthy wail and the same ability to wrap her parents around her tiny fingers. James, now 2.5, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit next to Willow while she nursed Rose, patting the baby's head gently and singing nonsense songs. "Gentle, James," Willow would remind him. "Baby Rose is very small." "I protect her," James announced solemnly. "Like Papa protects you." Willow met Henry's eyes over their children's heads, and they shared a smile of perfect understanding. This was what happiness looked like. This messy, chaotic, beautiful life they'd built together. As the children grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Henry expanded the cattle operation and began breeding horses as well. Willow's gardens produced more than enough to supply Samuel's store, and she began selling preserves and baked goods as well. They saved money carefully, planning for the children's future. When James was 5 and Rose was 3, Henry surprised Willow by taking her to town and showing her a small building on the main street. "What do you think?" he asked. "About what?" "About opening a shop. You could sell your preserves and baked goods directly. Maybe take orders for sewing. I know you've been doing mending for people already." Henry looked at her hopefully. "I thought it might be something you'd enjoy, a place that's yours." Willow was stunned. "Henry, that would cost money. Money we're saving for the children. We're doing well enough to do both. And I want you to have something of your own, something beyond the ranch. You've worked so hard to build a life here. You deserve to see your efforts recognized." The shop opened in the spring of 1894. Willow called it simply the Garden Shop, and she stocked it with her preserves, baked goods, and vegetables in season. She also offered sewing services and sold eggs from her chickens. To her amazement, it was immediately successful. Women came from all over the area to buy her goods and to visit with her. Slowly, through the shop, Willow built friendships with women from the surrounding communities. They traded recipes and sewing patterns. They talked about their children and their challenges. They became friends. One day, a woman came into the shop who looked vaguely familiar. It took Willow a moment to place her, and when she did, her stomach dropped. It was one of the women from Muskogee, someone who'd been in the crowd that had condemned her all those years ago. The woman recognized her at the same time. "Willow Winchester," she said, then she corrected herself. "Willow Norris, I suppose it is now. Can I help you with something?" Willow kept her voice level, though her heart was pounding. "I came to buy some of your preserves. I heard they were the best to be had." The woman paused. "And I came to apologize." Willow blinked. "Apologize? For what happened in Muskogee? For how we treated you? It wasn't right." The woman looked down at her hands. "My name is Elizabeth Carter. I was friends with the man who died, the man who attacked you. When it happened, I believed what I wanted to believe, that you were to blame. But I've had years to think about it, and I know now that I was wrong. Thomas was a drunk and a brute, and what he did to you was inexcusable. You had every right to defend yourself." Willow didn't know what to say. She'd imagined confrontations with people from her past, but never an apology. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Elizabeth continued. "I just wanted you to know that I was wrong, and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve how we treated you." "Thank you," Willow said finally. "That means more than you know." Elizabeth bought a selection of preserves and left, and Willow stood in her shop feeling like another piece of her past had been laid to rest. The condemnation of Muskogee had haunted her for years, even in her happiness. Knowing that at least some people had reconsidered their judgment brought a sense of peace she hadn't expected. That evening she told Henry about the encounter. He listened carefully, then pulled her into his arms. "I'm glad she apologized," he said. "You deserved that." "But Willow, even if she hadn't, even if everyone in Muskogee still believed the worst of you, it wouldn't change anything. You know who you are. I know who you are. Our children know who you are. That's what matters." "I know, but it still felt good to hear." Life continued its rhythm. The children grew and thrived. James started school in town, riding in with Henry when he went to work with the cattle or horses. Rose, following in her mother's footsteps, showed a keen interest in the garden and could identify most of the plants by the time she was 4. In the spring of 1896, Willow discovered she was pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was more difficult than the previous 2, and the midwife warned her to rest as much as possible. Henry hired more help for both the ranch and the shop, insisting that Willow's health came first. The baby, another boy they named Thomas after Henry's grandfather, was born in late fall after a labor that terrified Henry and left Willow exhausted for weeks. But Thomas was healthy, and once Willow recovered, she threw herself back into the life she loved. They had 3 children now, a thriving ranch, a successful shop, and a place in the community. It was more than Willow had ever dreamed possible when she'd been walking down that dusty road outside Muskogee, alone and desperate. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Henry took Willow out to the porch after the children were asleep. The night was warm and the stars were brilliant overhead. 10 years, he said, handing her a small wrapped package. "Seems impossible that it's been that long." Willow opened the package to find a beautiful silver locket. Inside were tiny photographs of their 3 children. "Henry, it's beautiful. You're beautiful. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible." Henry took her hand. "When I saw you walking down that road, so determined and strong despite everything you'd been through, I knew you were someone special. I just didn't know how special. I didn't know you'd become my whole world." "You gave me everything," Willow said, tears streaming down her face. "A home, a family, a chance to start over. You saw me when I was at my lowest and you offered me hope." "We gave each other everything," Henry corrected. You think I wasn't lost when you came along. I was going through the motions of living, but I wasn't really alive. The ranch was just work to keep me busy. The house was just a place to sleep. You made it all mean something. You brought life back to this place, to me." They sat together on the porch, holding hands and watching the stars, just as they had on so many nights over the past 10 years. The children were asleep inside. The ranch was quiet around them. The garden waited for morning to show off its blooms. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Willow asked. "If you hadn't stopped that day, if you'd just driven past me on the road?" "Sometimes. But I don't dwell on it, because that's not what happened. I did stop. You did accept my help. We built this life together." Henry raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I don't believe in fate exactly, but I do believe that sometimes people come into our lives exactly when we need them. You needed a place to start over. I needed someone to remind me what living was for. We found each other at exactly the right moment." As the years continued to pass, the Norris family became a fixture in the community. James grew into a serious young man who loved working with the horses. Rose remained devoted to the garden and showed a talent for growing things that rivaled her mother's. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into mischief, but with a generous heart that meant he couldn't stay in trouble for long. The shop continued to thrive, becoming a gathering place for women in the community. Willow found herself becoming a confidante to many of them, offering advice and support. Several times, women came to her with stories of abuse or mistreatment, and Willow helped them the way Henry had once helped her, offering work or shelter or just a listening ear. "You're building something important," Henry told her one day when she expressed frustration that she couldn't help everyone. "You're showing women that they have value beyond what society says they should be. That's powerful." In 1900, when James was 11, Rose was 8, and Thomas was 4, Willow and Henry celebrated their 15th anniversary. The celebration was larger this time, with friends and neighbors coming from miles around to help them mark the occasion. Samuel Foster, now in his 60s but still spry, raised a toast. "To Henry and Willow Norris, two of the finest people I know, may you have many more years of happiness together." The crowd echoed the sentiment, and Willow looked around at all the faces, so many of them dear to her now. These were her people. This was her community. She'd built it slowly, carefully, earning trust and giving it in return. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, Henry and Willow stood in the garden she'd first reclaimed 15 years ago. The moonlight silvered the leaves and made the flowers glow. "I was thinking," Henry said, "maybe it's time we expanded the house again. The children are getting older and they could use more space." "Or maybe," Willow said with a smile, "we could build a separate cabin for James. He's getting to an age where he might appreciate some privacy." "That's a good idea, though it'll be strange him not being in the house." Henry pulled her close. "They're all growing up so fast. That's what children do." Willow rested her head on his shoulder. "We raise them to be independent, to make their own way in the world. Like their mother did." "Like their parents did," Willow corrected. "You had to rebuild your life too, Henry, after losing your family after Hannah's death. You were brave enough to open your heart again, to take a chance on a stranger who had nothing to offer but hard work and a willingness to try. You had everything to offer. You just didn't know it yet." They stood in the garden for a long time, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built a life that was richer than either of them could have imagined alone. The years continued their steady march. James did get his own cabin when he turned 13, a small but sturdy building Henry and he constructed together. Rose took over more of the garden work, expanding it further and adding new varieties of flowers and vegetables. Thomas started school and immediately became the teacher's favorite challenge, too smart for his own good and always full of questions. The shop expanded as well. Willow took on 2 women to help her run it, both of them women who'd fallen on hard times and needed work. She paid them fairly and treated them with respect, and in return, they were fiercely loyal to her. In 1903, when a new family moved to the area, fleeing persecution for their religious beliefs, it was Willow who organized the community to help them get established. She'd been the outsider once, the one everyone judged and condemned. She wouldn't let that happen to others if she could help it. "You've become quite the force in this community," Henry observed one evening. "I just try to help where I can. The way you helped me. What I did for you was simple. What you're doing is building a legacy of kindness and acceptance. That's far more significant." But Willow didn't see it that way. She was just doing what felt right, helping people who needed help, standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. In the summer of 1905, a young woman showed up at the ranch, dirty and exhausted, with a black eye and a split lip. Willow was working in the garden when she arrived, and she recognized the look in the woman's eyes immediately. It was the same look she'd seen in her own eyes all those years ago, the desperate hope that someone somewhere might offer help. "Can I help you?" Willow asked gently, setting down her gardening tools. "I heard there was a woman here who helps people like me," the young woman said. "Women who have nowhere else to go. You heard right. Come on, let's get you some water and food and you can tell me what you need." The young woman, whose name was Catherine, had been married to a man who beat her. She'd finally gathered the courage to leave, but she had nowhere to go and no money. Willow gave her work in the shop and a room in the back of the building. Over the following months, Catherine healed both physically and emotionally. She proved to be talented with numbers, and soon she was managing the financial side of the shop. When a young rancher started courting her, Willow made sure he understood that Catherine was under her protection and that any mistreatment would have serious consequences. The rancher turned out to be a good man, and he and Catherine were married a year later. They remained close friends with the Norris family, another thread in the tapestry of community Willow had helped weave. "How many people have you helped now?" Henry asked one evening. "I don't keep count." "Why would I?" "Because I think it's important to recognize the good you've done, the lives you've changed." Willow thought about it. Catherine was just one of many. There was Anne, who'd started as their cleaning help and now ran a successful boarding house in town. There was Margaret, a widow with 3 children who Willow had given work to, allowing her to keep her family together. There was Susan, a woman who'd been abandoned by her husband and whom Willow had taught to sew, enabling her to support herself. "I suppose I've helped a fair number," Willow admitted. "But Henry, I'm only able to do that because of what you did for me. You showed me that people can be kind, that second chances exist. I'm just passing that gift along." As James approached his 18th birthday in 1907, he announced his intention to expand the horse breeding operation. He had a good eye for horses and a natural talent for training them. Henry was proud of his son's ambition and worked with him to make the expansion happen. Rose, now 15, had become indispensable to both the garden and the shop. She'd inherited her mother's talent for growing things and had added her own innovations, experimenting with new crops and preservation methods. She'd also inherited her mother's compassion, and she often helped Willow with the women who came seeking assistance. Thomas, at 11, was showing signs of wanting to be a lawman. He was fascinated by justice and fairness, probably because he'd grown up hearing his mother's story and understanding the importance of standing up for what was right. He's going to make a fine marshal someday, Henry predicted. If he doesn't drive his teachers completely mad first, Willow added with a laugh. In the fall of 1907, Willow received a letter that surprised her. It was from Elizabeth Carter, the woman from Muskogee who'd apologized years ago. Elizabeth wrote that she was organizing a group of women to advocate for better treatment of women who'd been victims of violence. She wanted Willow's input and support. Willow showed the letter to Henry. "What do you think?" "I think you should do it. You have knowledge and experience that could help a lot of women." So Willow began corresponding with Elizabeth and the group she'd formed. She shared her story, offering insights into what women in desperate situations needed most: safety, work, and people willing to believe them. The group used her suggestions to create a network of safe houses and employment opportunities for women fleeing violence. "You're changing the world," Rose said one day, reading over her mother's shoulder as she wrote another letter. "I'm just trying to make it a little bit better for women who are where I once was." "That's what changing the world means, Mama." In 1909, Henry and Willow celebrated their 24th anniversary quietly, just the two of them. The children were old enough now to fend for themselves for an evening, so Henry took Willow to the creek where they'd first stopped all those years ago. "You remember?" he asked. "Of course I remember. I was terrified and desperate, and you were the first person in years who'd shown me genuine kindness. I saw something in you that day: strength, determination, dignity despite everything you'd been through. I couldn't just drive past that. I'm so glad you didn't." Willow leaned against him. 24 years, 3 beautiful children, a successful ranch and business, friends and community. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. Believe it, you earned every bit of it. They sat by the creek until the stars came out. Two people who'd saved each other and built a life of love and purpose together. As 1910 dawned, bringing with it a new decade, the Norris family stood on solid ground. James, now 21, was making a name for himself as a horse breeder. Rose, 18, was being courted by a young man from town who treated her with the respect and kindness she deserved. Thomas, 13, was excelling in school and still talked about becoming a lawman. The ranch was prosperous, the shop was thriving, and Willow's work helping women in need had expanded to cover several counties. She'd become known as someone who could be trusted, someone who would help without judgment. In the spring of 1910, a journalist from Oklahoma City came to interview Willow about her advocacy work. The resulting article painted her as a pioneer in women's rights, someone who'd overcome tremendous adversity to build not just a successful life, but also a network of support for other women. "I'm not comfortable being held up as some kind of hero," Willow told Henry after the article was published. "I just do what anyone should do. But most people don't do it. That's what makes it special." Henry read through the article again. "I'm proud of you, Willow. Not because of what you've accomplished, though that's impressive. I'm proud because you never let what happened to you make you bitter or hard. You took that pain and turned it into compassion for others." The article brought more attention than Willow wanted, but it also brought more women seeking help. She expanded her network, bringing in other women who'd overcome their own difficulties and were willing to help others. Together, they created a system that provided real, practical assistance to women in crisis. In the summer of 1911, Rose announced her engagement to Michael Harrison, the young man who'd been courting her. Henry and Willow both approved of the match. Michael was kind, hardworking, and clearly adored Rose. The wedding was held at the ranch in October, with what seemed like the entire county in attendance. Willow watched her daughter marry, radiant in the dress they'd sewn together, and felt a bittersweet joy. Her baby was grown and starting her own life. "She'll be happy," Henry whispered, taking Willow's hand as they watched Rose and Michael exchange vows. "I know. Michael's a good man. He'll treat her well." "Like father, like son-in-law," Henry said with a smile. "She learned from watching us what a good marriage looks like. She won't settle for less." Rose and Michael settled on a farm about 5 miles from the Norris ranch, close enough to visit often but far enough to have their own space. Rose continued to help with the garden and the shop, and Willow loved having her daughter so close. In 1913, Rose gave birth to Willow and Henry's first grandchild, a girl named Lily. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Willow was overwhelmed with emotion. This tiny person represented a future she'd never dared imagine when she was young and alone and scared. "She has your eyes," Henry said, peering at the baby, "and Rose's nose. She's perfect." Henry touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Our granddaughter, can you believe it?" Willow couldn't, not really. But she held Lily close and promised silently to help create a world where this little girl would never have to face the things her grandmother had faced. James married the following year, to a smart young woman named Alice who shared his passion for horses. They built a house on the Norris property and began their own horse breeding operation in partnership with James's father. Thomas, now 17, had indeed decided to pursue a career in law enforcement. He was apprenticing with the local marshal and planning to attend a law enforcement training program in Oklahoma City. "All 3 of them, settled and happy," Willow said one evening. "We did something right. We loved them and supported them and taught them to be good people. That's all any parent can do." Henry pulled her close. "And now we get to enjoy being grandparents." The years that followed brought more grandchildren. Rose and Michael had 2 more daughters. James and Alice had twin boys who kept everyone on their toes. The Norris Ranch became a gathering place for the growing family, especially on Sundays when everyone would come for dinner. Willow, now in her late 40s, found herself reflecting more on the journey that had brought her here. Sometimes she'd stand in her garden, now vast and beautiful, and remember the weedy patch it had been when she first arrived. The transformation was complete, from that abandoned space to this thriving testament to care and dedication. In 1918, Thomas was sworn in as a deputy marshal. Henry and Willow attended the ceremony, bursting with pride. Their youngest child had found his calling, following in the footsteps of the lawman who'd shown his mother mercy all those years ago. "He's going to be fair," Willow said. "He's going to remember that there are always 2 sides to every story." "He learned from the best," Henry replied. That same year, Willow received a letter from Elizabeth Carter with surprising news. The advocacy group they'd worked on together had helped pass new laws in Oklahoma protecting women from domestic violence and providing legal recourse for victims. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. "We did that," Elizabeth wrote. "Your story, your willingness to share it, helped convince lawmakers that changes were needed. You should be proud." Willow was proud, but more than that, she was grateful. Grateful that her painful past could be used to help others. Grateful that something good had come from something so terrible. As Henry and Willow approached their 30th anniversary in 1919, they decided to celebrate with a large party. The whole family would be there, along with friends from throughout the community. It would be a celebration not just of their marriage, but of the life they'd built together. The party was everything they'd hoped for. The ranch was filled with people, with laughter and music and abundant food. Children ran everywhere, including Willow and Henry's 6 grandchildren. Friends told stories about the early days of the ranch when Willow had first arrived. "I remember when you 2 got married," Samuel Foster said, raising a glass. Some folks thought Henry was making a mistake, taking on a woman with a past. But I knew better. I knew you two were perfect for each other. Here's to 30 years of proving the doubters wrong." As the sun set and the party continued, Willow found herself standing in her garden, looking at the house glowing with lamplight, hearing the sounds of celebration. Henry came to stand beside her. "Tired?" he asked. "No, just happy. I wanted to take a moment to appreciate all of this." 30 years, Henry mused. Seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. You ever regret it, taking a chance on me? Henry turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Willow Norris, in 30 years of marriage, I have never once regretted asking you to share my life. You are the best decision I ever made. You've brought me more joy than I ever thought possible. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be better than I was. If I could go back to that day when I saw you walking down the road, I'd do everything exactly the same." Willow stood on her toes to kiss him. "I love you, Henry Norris. You saved my life. We saved each other." Henry kissed her back, "And we built something beautiful together." They returned to the party hand in hand, ready to celebrate with the people they loved, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and love that had endured every challenge. As the years continued into the 1920s, Henry and Willow settled into a comfortable rhythm. They were grandparents now, more focused on spoiling grandchildren than on the day-to-day running of the ranch, though both still contributed where they could. James had taken over most of the ranch operations, running them with the same care and attention his father had taught him. The shop had been passed to Anne, who ran it with the same compassion Willow had shown. The advocacy network for women had grown beyond anything Willow had imagined, with chapters in several states now, all working to protect and support women in need. In 1923, Henry and Willow took a trip, something they'd never done before. They traveled to Texas to see where Henry had grown up, visiting places from his childhood. It was a journey into the past, but also a celebration of how far they'd come. "My parents would have loved you," Henry said as they stood at his parents' graves. "Hannah would have loved you too. She would have been proud of everything you've done to help women like her. I wish I could have known them. They live on in our children and grandchildren. In the values we pass down. That's all any of us can hope for really, to leave the world a little better than we found it and to raise children who will do the same." As they traveled back to Oklahoma, Willow felt a deep sense of peace. She'd lived a life beyond anything she could have imagined that day when Henry had stopped his wagon to offer her a ride. She'd been loved, she'd loved in return, she'd raised children and helped countless women. She'd made a difference. In the spring of 1925, as Willow tended her garden at the age of 60, she reflected on the full circle her life had made. She'd started with nothing, been cast out and condemned, and had found not just survival but true happiness. She'd taken the hand Henry offered and built a life that mattered. Henry, now 63, still worked with the horses when his joints allowed it. They'd both slowed down with age, but they were healthy and active, blessed with good genes and a lifetime of physical work that had kept them strong. "What are you thinking about?" Henry asked, coming to sit beside her on the garden bench he'd built years ago. "Everything, nothing. How lucky I am. How lucky we both are." Henry took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "We've had a good life, haven't we? The best life." Willow leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a lonely rancher with a broken heart." They sat in the garden as the sun began to set, surrounded by the flowers Willow had planted and tended for nearly 40 years. The house behind them was quiet now that it was just the two of them again, but it was never truly empty. Family came to visit regularly, filling it with noise and laughter and life. "We should plan another anniversary party," Willow said. 36 years this year, that's worth celebrating." "Every year with you is worth celebrating." Henry kissed her temple. "But yes, let's have a party. Let's gather everyone together and remind them what love looks like when it's built on respect and partnership and genuine caring." The party that summer was smaller than the 30th anniversary celebration had been, but no less meaningful. All 3 children were there with their spouses and children. Samuel and Margaret Foster came, both now in their 80s but still sharp and engaged. Anne brought her grown children. Catherine and her husband came with their family. As Willow looked around at all the faces, she saw the impact of one act of kindness rippling outward. Henry had helped her. She'd helped others. Those others had helped still more. The compassion had multiplied, spreading throughout the community and beyond. "I want to say something," Willow announced, standing up after dinner. The conversation quieted, everyone turning to listen. 36 years ago, I was walking down a dusty road with nothing but a carpet bag and $2 to my name. The whole world had turned its back on me, and I didn't know how I was going to survive another week, let alone build a life. Then Henry stopped his wagon and offered me a ride to water and shade. That simple act of kindness changed everything." She looked at Henry, who was watching her with love in his eyes. "But it wasn't just Henry who gave me a new beginning. It was all of you. Everyone who accepted me, who became my friend, who chose to see who I was rather than what people said about me. You all gave me the family and community I'd lost. You gave me a place to belong." Willow turned to her children. "And you 3, you gave me purpose. You made me want to be better, to create a world where kindness matters more than judgment. Watching you grow into the wonderful people you are has been my greatest joy." Finally, she looked around at all the others gathered there. "To everyone here, thank you. Thank you for being part of this life we've built. Thank you for showing that people can change, can grow, can choose compassion over condemnation. You've all made my life richer than I ever dreamed possible." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering. Henry stood and pulled Willow into his arms, and their children and grandchildren surrounded them in a group embrace. That night, after everyone had gone home, Henry and Willow sat on their porch one more time, watching the stars come out. "That was quite a speech," Henry said. "I meant every word. I know you did. That's why it was so powerful." Henry was quiet for a moment. "You know, when I lost Hannah, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never feel anything but grief and guilt again. But then you came along and reminded me that life goes on, that there can be joy after sorrow, love after loss." "We healed each other," Willow said. "That's what love does. It doesn't erase the pain, but it makes it bearable. It gives us a reason to keep going." They sat in comfortable silence, these 2 people who'd found each other against all odds and built a love that had stood the test of time. The ranch stretched out around them, a testament to their hard work and dedication. The garden bloomed in the darkness, a symbol of growth and renewal. "I'd do it all again," Willow said quietly. "Every hard moment, every challenge, every fear. I'd walk down that road again if I knew it led to you." "And I'd stop that wagon every time," Henry replied, "because a life without you isn't a life I want to imagine." As the years moved toward 1930, Henry and Willow entered their 70s with grace and gratitude. They'd lived long enough to see their grandchildren growing up, to see the legacy they'd built continuing into the next generation. The ranch was in good hands with James. The advocacy work Willow had started was thriving under new leadership. Their children were happy and successful. On a warm evening in late September 1929, as they celebrated 38 years of marriage with just their immediate family, Willow looked at Henry across the table and felt her heart swell with love. He'd aged, as had she. His hair was white now, his face lined with the years. But when he looked at her, she still saw the young man who'd offered her water and shade, who'd given her a chance when no one else would. "To us," Henry said, raising his glass. "To 38 years of love, laughter, and building a life worth living." "To us," Willow echoed, clinking her glass against his. "To second chances and new beginnings, to kindness that changed everything." Their children and grandchildren joined the toast, and Willow knew that this was the happily ever after she'd never dared to dream of. Not a perfect life, not a life without challenges or sorrow, but a life filled with love and purpose and people who mattered. She'd been cast out for her choices, condemned by those who should have shown mercy. But a forgiving cowboy had offered her a fresh beginning, and together they'd built something beautiful. They'd created a family, a home, a legacy of compassion that would outlive them both. As the evening wound down and their family said their goodbyes, Willow and Henry walked hand in hand to their garden one last time. The flowers were still blooming, defying the approaching autumn, and the stars were brilliant overhead. "Happy anniversary, my love," Henry said, pulling her close. "Happy anniversary," Willow replied, standing on her toes to kiss him. "Here's to many more." They stood in the garden they'd created together, two souls who'd found each other in the vast loneliness of the Oklahoma Territory and had built a love story for the ages. The past was behind them, full of both pain and triumph. The future stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility, but this moment, standing together under the stars in the garden they'd grown from weeds and determination, this moment was perfect. This moment was everything, and it was enough.